Mas eu posso anunciar a pergunta.
Gente, vamos começar, tá todo mundo pronto. Vocês estão prontos? Vocês estão prontos? Vamos lá.
Okay.
Eu vou abrir aqui o som de Paulo. Fala aí, Paulo.
Olá, galera, tudo jóia? Beleza? Seguinte, gente, já estamos aqui com o Cris, o editor. A gente já vai começar a live de agora. Eu espero que vocês participem bastante, que vocês gostem dessa live. Depois a gente vai, como a gente já explicou, fazer umas perguntas primeiro, baseado no tipo de pergunta que vocês enviaram para a gente deu uns ajustes. E logo depois a gente vai dar uma abertura assim, para algumas perguntas a mais, sabe? A live com ele, no máximo, hoje vai durar até as 11h30. Então, quem tiver pergunta, quem tiver vontade de saber algumas coisas, chegue agora, participe, chame seus amigos também, quem quiser participar. Lembrando que quanto mais participação a gente tiver, mais fácil vai ser de trazer novas pessoas, novos assuntos aqui. Então, eu vou começar a falar em inglês. Quando eu for fazer a pergunta, eu vou fazer a pergunta em português e inglês, mas normalmente aqui a live vai ser em inglês, tá bom? Então, qualquer coisa, perguntem para a Giovana que ela escreve no chat. Ok, Chris? Nice to see you, man. I think every week we see each other on the meetings and all. So I'm thankful because you're here with us, and I hope you can chat a lot with us and bring some answer for these questions that people really ask us all the time. Sometimes they ask us and want to ask you too, because you're an editor and you know things that they don't do because you're on the market. So I want you to present yourself, to talk about you a bit before we can go to the questions, okay?
Okay, well, yeah. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm Chris. I'm a manga editor. I first got into manga editing around 2017 when I joined Coamix in Tokyo. And I was an editor on the silent manga audition for the masterclass. But prior to that, I worked in literary publishing. So I was a literary editor in London. So that's basically books and novels and things like that. So it wasn't a huge leap into manga. You know, the fundamentals are pretty much the same when it comes to editing. So from Japan, I accepted a job in Saudi Arabia to help launch a fantastic project, which was or is Manga Arabia, which is now, I'm happy to say, a very successful magazine in the Arabic-speaking world. And that was to help launch and develop original manga for that market. So I did around 2-3 years working on that. And then I transferred back to Japan, where I now work for Manga International, which is essentially the same concept of licensed manga and original manga. But that is to be distributed on a global level rather than a regional level.
Wow. And now in a global level, that's the thing. And people are eager to know, I think. Every day they ask us, what is the editorial? Man, we can't speak that much yet, but you will see. Okay, Chris. I think before we start with the questions itself, how it was the difference in work, like for editorial from literacy and for manga, because there's like
Antes de ele responder, fala em português também.
Não, eu falo em português, calma. Okay, Gigi was asking me to ask this in Portuguese too, but okay. I will. Don't worry. Okay, so what's the difference to working with like script text and working with manga? Just a moment. Ok, pessoal, estou perguntando para ele qual é a diferença, porque ele primeiro, antes de trabalhar com mangá, ele trabalhou sendo editor de livros e revistas que não eram de mangá, eram de texto mesmo, eram livros mesmo, sabe, escritos. E depois ele foi, quando foi trabalhar com o pessoal da Comics, no Silent Mangá, ele foi trabalhar com mangá. E eu estou perguntando qual é a diferença. Ok, Chris. You can go ahead.
So the role of an editor, either in literature or in manga, is pretty much the same. It's taking a wonderful piece of work and then working with the creator to mold it, to craft it into something that is both unique, but most importantly, that will sell at the end of the day. And for it to sell, it needs to be good. And that applies to any kind of editing. The big difference with manga editing is that manga is a visual narrative. So the story and the visuals work in tandem to tell a story. So editing that did require kind of going back to school, really, and just kind of understanding how that works and how I can effectively edit that into something successful. I was very lucky at Comics because there's a lot of experienced Japanese manga editors there that I was able to learn from. But again, because I had that background in the UK, it wasn't a huge leap. So a lot of it did seem pretty obvious, really.
I think we all had to get back in school in a way, right?
Yeah.
You as editor and we as authors when we started to work with Japanese media. Okay, so now we can go ahead to the questions. I will first ask in Portuguese and after in English, okay? Yeah. Ok, so first, para vocês, galera, a primeira pergunta que a gente preparou para ele, né? Agora vamos seguir com as perguntas, né? A primeira pergunta foi: como é o trabalho de editor? Em específico, quais as funções que um editor é responsável? E por que você escolheu esta profissão? Okay, the question is, what's the job of an editor like? Specifically, what are the functions that an editor is responsible for? And why did you choose this profession?
Okay, well, as previously said, you know, an editor's job is to help work with the creator, mangaka in this case, to craft something that is unique, that entertains, that resonates with the reader, because all those things people will want to read. You know, that's it at the end of the day. And the way we do that is to use experience, read lots of manga, and that applies to mangaka as well. So all you guys who want to become mangaka, you have to read it. It's simple as that. That is the schooling. You know, that is going back to school.
You can go. No, you can go.
Yeah. And a love of storytelling. You know, if you want to be an editor, you have to love storytelling. You know, and you have to love stories, because you know what is effective and what isn't. You know, it's not a case of reinventing the wheel. You know, that you pretty much all stories follow a format. It's just, you know, what are the ingredients in that to make it unique? What was the second part of the question?
Oh, the second part is, and why did you choose this profession? What made you choose to be an editor?
Okay, well, you know, when I was very, very young, I love manga. I mean, I'm 45 now, so the manga that I was reading was like Akira, you know, Fist of the North Star, you know, that kind of golden age of so this was in the 90s, yeah. And then, you know, I kind of stopped reading it as I got older and I got into reading books, and that's when I kind of found myself in the publishing industry in London. Then I moved to Japan. I met my wife in London, who's Japanese. And then I was very, very lucky enough to take this opportunity with the Silent Manga audition. And that kind of put me on this career path now. It was a kind of 1 in a million chance. So, you know, I grabbed it.
1 in a million. Also, about one comment you did for the thing that people that have to read manga to make manga. That's something that we say a lot to the people here, because I think this generation right now, it's really addicted to animation. That's good. Animation is good. Yeah. But sometimes they don't read enough and want to make And sometimes I don't know if it's just in Brazil that we have this tendency, or we have this tendency like globally. What do you think about it?
Oh, it's definitely a global
global
thing. I think globally anime far outstrips manga as far as consumers, which is pretty sad, really. But I think that's a sign of the times. Because we've got platforms, all these kind of platforms, YouTube, TikTok, etc. But you cannot underestimate how much you can learn from reading manga. Structurally, it's the same. If you were to, read Dan the Dan and then watch the anime, of course, structurally, story-wise, it's identical. But you miss the tricks that mangaka use to tell a story effectively and uniquely and excitingly as well.
Okay, for the next question. Em relação a quadrinho, existe alguma hierarquia entre desenho e história? Ou seja, uma boa história sustenta desenho ruim ou vice-versa? Now the question. Regarding a comic, is there any hierarchy between drawing and story? In other words, does a good story support a bad drawing or vice-versa?
Manga, like I said before, manga's a visual narrative. So it's literally 50-50. The responsibility of telling a story, they are just as important as each other. So no, one isn't more important than the other, I would say. I think manga's very unique if you compare it to Western comic books. What you'll see in Western comic books is there's a lot of text. There's a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of exposition text. There's a lot of establishing text. Whereas manga really does work in tandem with the art. It's all about conveying a message, moving the story along through art alone. So you'll see very little kind of little boxes saying, what's happening, because you can see what's happening. So I think manga's very, very unique in that, especially compared to Western comics. So yeah, I wouldn't place one above the other, essentially, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's always wonderful to see a unique story paired with incredible artwork. And as I mentioned Dan the Dan before, but that's a really good example. It's an incredibly unique story. It's an incredibly unique concept with very interesting characters, but it's paired with this incredible artwork. And the better the artwork, the better the story, it just enhances the whole, basically.
Okay, I think now you can learn. Now that you're listening to an editor, you can learn that there's nothing like the best is to invest on story. The best is to invest in the drawing. Try everything. I think you have to fight with the weapons you have, right?
Yeah, I mean, manga's a singular entity. It is a story that's told through art. So it's I wouldn't separate. That they are the same thing essentially.
Okay, now to the next question. Quão importante é o protagonista no mangá? E quais as melhores formas de destacar o seu papel? Só aparecer mais em quadros maiores? Okay, the question is, how important is the protagonist in the manga, and what are the best ways to highlight his role? Just appear more in larger frames?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, so the protagonist is the story at the end of the day. We wouldn't be able to follow a story without a protagonist. Basically, the protagonist is the reader in a lot of ways, because we're seeing the story unfold through their eyes. So what surprises them surprises us as the reader, essentially. So it's really important to create a protagonist who is interesting, visually and developed. But most important is to create a character that is relatable. You need to create a relatable protagonist, because readers need to be able to relate to the protagonist. In that way, they become invested emotionally, and we cheer them along. I mean, we've all read Naruto, we've all read Dragon Ball, we relate to these characters. And when they win, we can feel it's a visceral kind of reaction. That's what you need to get from your readers. You want your readers to be cheering those protagonists along. So especially in shonen manga, it's very, very important to create a very relatable character. And you'll see like Naruto and Goku, they are, because shonen is aimed at young boys, or certainly, that's what its origins are. So we create naughty boys in Naruto. We create selfish boys in Goku, and we create these characters that age group relates to. So it's so important to create a relatable character. And that's essentially true for all genres. The protagonist is what drives the story. We follow their journey. As far as larger frames, the size of the frames will depend on what you want to achieve within that narrative. Whenever you introduce the protagonist, we want a full head to shot, top to bottom. We want to see the protagonist because we will remember that character, and so, we want to have a real big celebratory kind of introduction. And we want that protagonist to be doing something in that introduction that sums them up and sums the manga up. I think, a good example would be Tanjiro in Kimetsu no Yaiba. When we first see Tanjiro, we'll see a head to foot, and he's holding the charcoal bag because he's going to go down the mountain to sell the charcoal. What that's showing us is that he loves his family. He will do anything for his family. He's going to kind of do this treacherous trip down the mountain to sell the charcoal. And that is who Tanjiro is. That's his driving force throughout the manga because, his motivation or his goal is to save his sister and turn her back into a human again. So it's kind of embodying who that character is within that first introduction. So it's really important to make a splash with that protagonist. We need to know who that person is. We need to know what their motivations are, and we need to know their personality right from the beginning, right from the starting gate.
And I think we have to feel the protagonist like part of our family, right?
Oh, absolutely.
In a way.
Absolutely. Yeah, because essentially, what you're doing as a mangaka is that you're demanding a lot from your readers. You're demanding their time, you're demanding their attention, you're demanding, sacrificing their time to read your story. So you need to deliver on that sacrifice.
Just a moment. O que era, Gigi? Não, mas depois. Salve. Okay, she was just asking something. Okay, I think the next question is a really hard one to answer because it involves something that even editors don't really know when. Ok, first in português. Quais são os critérios que fazem um quadrinho ser serializado? Existe algum critério que não é tão óbvio? What are the criteria that make a comic book serialized? Are there any criteria that are not so obvious?
Yeah.
It's hard, right?
I think any manga or any story, not just manga, movies, books, it starts with a concept, a kind of what if, that's the seed of any story. And depending on how unique or how well developed that concept is, will determine if you can create a long story out of that. Some concepts are fine as a one shot. They're not strong enough to kind of support a serialization, whereas others have kind of so geniusly simple are able to kind of run with it and go on and on and on. If you look at what we've seen, like with a concept like, there's a monster or a demon inside of a child, that is a fantastic, very simple concept. And where do you run with that? Then, a book that if you write a name in it, that person will die. A devilishly simple concept. So, it's about, can you create a simple concept, and then it's a case of asking the right questions, once you've come up with that. So, yeah, it all comes back to the concept. Is the concept, is it flexible enough to kind of be able to kind of extend that into a serialization, and that kind of, that rule applies to most genres as well. I mean, if you look at seinen manga, with seinen manga, it's usually there's a predetermined end, and it runs for as long as that story needs it to run. But then you can look at shonen manga, where the concept is so open, simple, unique, and open that it can effectively run forever. If you think about One Piece, for instance, where we're coming close to like 1,500 to 2,000 chapters now.
And I can't see an end to it. Maybe 5 years, maybe 10.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, it could. It's so beautifully kind of designed that it could run forever, essentially. And there's a lot of elements that make that happen. It is a very open-ended concept. There's incredible characters, and it follows a kind of wonderful, like a process each of those arcs. And then, of course, you wrap all that up and deliver it within Kisho Tenketsu. You deliver that within that very structured, familiar story structure as well. So, to be, again, it's about the concept. It's the concept. Is it robust enough to be able to hold a serialization or not?
Yeah, and I can't agree more. I can't say better than you on this. Okay, we are halfway right now, and the question in Portuguese. Com relação aos painéis e narrativa das páginas, existe alguma regra que um autor deveria prestar atenção, no qual os editores sempre prestam atenção? Regarding the panels and narrative on the pages, are there any rules that an author should pay attention to that editors always notice?
Well, essentially, you want, the best thing to achieve as a mangaka, or what you should be aiming for, is to deliver a story where the reader forgets they're reading manga. They're so engrossed into it that they forget this is manga completely, because they're 100% their attention is on reading the story. And to be able to do that, you need to deliver that in a seamless way. So depending on the number of panels, how the panels are arranged within the panels, we go for a zigzag formation, which comes very naturally. So we kind of manipulate the eye in how we do that. If you've got too many panels, or if there's too much dialogue, or if the panels are cramped with detail, you will kind of smash that illusion. You will destroy that illusion, and then suddenly you will realize, I'm reading a manga. And then the minute that happens, you've lost your reader, essentially. Yeah. So you want them to read to the end. You want them to read a fantastic, unique, exciting, well-crafted story, delivered in a way, in a visual narrative that makes the person forget they're reading a manga. So always keep that in mind. I think at the end of the day, the golden rule is less is more. You don't, so if you think you need to do 5 panels, you probably only need to do 3 panels.
That there's this author that I think it's genius in the way he guides us. It's Kurumada from Saint Seiya. The way he guides our eyes on the panels, it's awesome. Yeah, I think the guys from the 8s and 9s, the first half of the 9s especially, they were like the best the best in this way, like Akira Toriyama, Togashi, or even the Kurumada itself. I think they were the best in this field.
Yeah, I mean, I think a little bit more recent. If you a masterclass in paneling is Golden Kamuy, and I strongly recommend you read that manga because that is a masterclass in paneling and being able to to kind of manipulate the eye, and you instantly forget you're reading a manga when you're reading that manga.
And when you see you're logging with them, crying with them, the characters are alive, and you're cheering for characters, that even the hateful characters you're cheering.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
It's awesome.
It's an absolute masterclass. So if you want to learn anything, read Golden Kamuy.
Ok, next question. Deveria eu trabalhar diferentes núcleos de personagens em uma one-shot? Se sim, existe alguma dica de como fazer isso bem? Should I work on different groups of characters in a one-shot? If so, are there any tips on how to do this well? Yes or no, right?
Well, the kind of number of characters you use will depend on the story at the end of the day. With a one-shot, you don't want to overburden it. Because you want to keep characters memorable. If you start adding more characters, then people will just forget who that person is. And essentially, a character needs to serve a purpose to be able to drive the story. So you need to be very efficient on the characters you create and include in that story. Does that character serve a purpose? Is that character able to drive the story to its conclusion? If you create a character where that doesn't happen, you don't need that character at the end of the day. A one shot is essentially like a live test of a concept. Mangaka in Japan, debut or not, they make an incredible amount of one shots. 99% of them don't even see the light of day. It's an exercise in storytelling, essentially, is what a one shot is. So a one shot is very efficient, let's say, in being able to tell that and successfully convey that concept. So again, going back to schooling, I strongly recommend you read as many one shots as you possibly can, especially one shots that then spawned a successful serialization. Just for a quick example, if you were to read the one shot for Death Note, it's very, very different to what the serialization is.
There's nothing of what we see on the story, unless the notebook, but
exactly
everything is different.
yeah, except for the notebook, except for the Death Note. So, but what you can see, and Bleach is similar as well. What you end up seeing is it's a very efficient, tight, bookended narrative that successfully delivers the concept. So that is what a one shot is. So if you're adding hundreds of characters in there, that's just going to confuse everything. So the golden rule is, does that character serve a purpose? Does that character drive the story? If it doesn't, that character's not needed.
Yeah. Okay, that's the tip. That's it, guys. I hope you guys follow this tip, please. Sometimes I see some one shots, people, visual deliverers, you see some, and there's a lot of characters. And the thing that every time I ask, why should I care for this character? Especially sometimes they even forget to make the protagonist shine.
Yeah. Because
they put a lot of characters. So I think it's better to stick on your main character every single time. Okay, so for the next question. Você tem alguma dica para fazer uma spread page e uma das páginas pode ter mais destaque do que a outra? Do you have any tips for creating a spread page, the double page, they say? And should one of the pages stand out more than the other?
So spread pages are a tool, essentially. It's a way to show something momentous, usually around the climax. So, the 10 moment of Kisho Tenketsu, you will see a spread. And it's usually the protagonist kind of winning the day, for example, doing the finishing move. So I'd be very sparing in how you use the spread. It has to have at least one, easily. Maybe a first chapter or a one shot would have 2, but kind of no more than that. When it kind of applies to all panels. All panels are important, and they serve a purpose. You could have a full page or half a page, and again, it's showing something incredibly important within that narrative. Like everything, less is more, as I mentioned before, because a spreadsheet is there about maximizing impact. Excuse me.
A bit of water.
Sorry, I should have brought something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's because some people here, I don't know if you recall the time when you were on comics. Sometimes I think a lot of Brazilians worked with a lot of spread pages per one shot. So yes. Sometimes I think the problem when they send like this, there's a lot. What do I have to see like the important page, the important moment? Yeah. Because they use it a lot. So there's a discussion right now here on Brazil forums and people that drawing about how to use a spread page. I think that's why they made this kind of question.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's if you look at kind of like movies and things like, you could apply that methodology to movies, like when in the climax of an action movie, it'll be a massive explosion. That's essentially a spreadsheet. A spread page, sorry, is that massive explosion. So, there's that old entertainment saying about, leave your audience wanting more. So if you kind of, overdo the spreads, you're giving them too much at the end of the day. So, you want to leave the readers wanting more. And you do that through impact. And that's what a spread page is.
Okay. For the next question, I think it's a question really lively right now because you can see every day on Twitter or Blue Sky or even Facebook or any other social network, people talking about artificial intelligence and all. So right now it's a question about this. Let me make a question in Portuguese. Como vocês, editores, estão observando o movimento das inteligências artificiais no uso para a arte? How are you, editors, viewing the movement of artificial intelligence for art?
Ooh, it's a hot topic.
Yeah.
Hot. I mean, I couldn't speak to my fellow editors. I'm sure a lot of editors have very differing views on this, but mine really is, I think AI potentially could be very helpful as a tool, within a planning stage of art. So, helping to create backgrounds or even, poses of characters. But I would limit it to that. I think anything more than that, if you're starting to use AI to write the story, or if you start to use AI to draw the manga, the finished manga, then you're no longer a creator. You're just typing prompts.
Yeah, you're just a prompt writer.
Exactly. So, it's funny, like one of my colleagues we were talking about this recently, actually. One of my colleagues said they remember when Clip Studio came out.
Yeah,
many years ago, and there was a big outrage about that. It's like Clip Studio is going to replace, ink and pen, and
or even digital art itself.
And digital art, exactly,
like Photoshop.
Exactly. You know, it outraged at the time, but now, you know, it's pretty much industry standard to use these digital tools. So, you know, it's all about balance, I guess, using it and using AI responsibly. You know, you're an artist, you know, you're a creator. Don't strip those skills away. You know, don't let a machine do it for you. So, you know, it's used responsibly, I think is probably what I'm trying to say.
And I think also, what drives you to draw? What drives you to do anything? It's because you like. It's not because someone said it's trending or something like this. It's because you like. So you draw because you like. You write stories because you like. That's right. So absolutely. It's not like
I'm not. Sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, it's not like this will remove the drive to do something, right?
Absolutely. You know, you want to be proud of what you've created. You know, I think, you know, and hard work is all about, you know, putting the hours in, you know, doing the learning, doing the studying, and then, you know, work incredibly hard to create something. If you take that away, you know, where's the achievement? You know, you climb a mountain, you don't take an escalator up in a mountain, you know, and so, you know, you need that kind of sense of achievement, which you can only get by putting the work in. On another note, I hate this Ghibli AI filter that's doing the rounds as well. You know,
oh my God,
incredibly
it probably will take just 1 month. After 1 month, it will just be over. Like the Disney AI, like the Pixar AI, hopefully. It's the same. It's always the same thing. So, and people are like, no, they are stealing. Wait a bit. Just wait a bit.
It is theft at the end of the day.
Yeah,
you know,
it's theft.
It's absolute theft, and you know, please don't aid and abet that theft by using these filters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, for the next question. Na sua visão de editor, o que você procura no design de personagem? Okay, it's a question about designing. As an editor, what do you look for in character design?
Well, ultimately, something that is unique. You know, the design of a character needs to embody who that character is, for one thing. You know, we want to be able to remember that character instantly. So, you know, creating an interesting, unique silhouette is vital for that. You know, you could see a silhouette of Luffy and you knew exactly it's Luffy.
Yeah,
you could see a silhouette of Goku and you know exactly it's Goku.
I think the dark shape test, right? The thing that you see the shape, okay, I know what it is.
Yeah,
something
absolutely.
Like this.
So, you know, you need to create a character that is both unique, embodies who that character is instantly recognizable, you know, instantly within milliseconds. I think a good thing, you know, as creators, when you're designing a character, just have in the back of your mind, you know, will people want to cosplay this character? You know, I think is a good way of looking at it. You know, would people, you know, cosplayers want to invest the time in recreating your design? That's always a good rule.
Oh, awesome! And the Windows just opened it. The view is awesome. The view is awesome. Don't close. I'm already missing it. Yeah. May we will arrive there.
Yes, for sure.
Okay. So I think it's the last question that we prepared, but I think people sent another questions here, but we will try after. Okay. So in Portuguese. Como autor, eu deveria ter a história definida desde a elaboração ou eu devo considerar a construção aos poucos? It's a question that I think, I think it's a beginner question. As an author, should I have the story defined from the outset or should I consider building it gradually?
You know, I think this goes back to what we talked about the concept, you know. You've got a concept, you've got a story. So I would focus more on getting the concept right and worrying less about writing the entire story or having an idea about the entire story. Again, manga, especially shonen, shoujo manga, is very unique in that it's incredibly flexible when compared to Western comics. I think in Western comics, they write the entire story out and then they give that script to an artist. I think that's pretty much how it's done. Whereas manga is a lot more evolving. A mangaka is probably thinking no more than 3 or 4 chapters ahead when they're creating a serialization. They have an idea about how they want to end it, but it will depend on how flexible and how unique the concept is that will determine the length of that serialization. So, it's focus on that concept. Is that concept robust enough? Is that concept open enough to be able to build on and to create that serialization? And then, I would possibly think, just thinking 3 or 4 chapter arcs, that's as far as you need to think when writing a serialization, because any manga is, if you look at it as one huge arc, which is the serialization, and that's made up of many, many mini arcs that drive the story to that conclusion. So you really only have to think around 3 or 4 chapters ahead within a mini arc, essentially, from, say, chapter 2 onwards. Because chapter 1 is essentially the one shot you've created. Chapter 1 is usually a bookended kind of narrative. That's where it's usually a lot more pages than following chapters. And then, think in mini arcs.
Okay, I think also to not be that stiff, because when you meet an editor, probably the editor will give you some insight and say, okay, this is good, and sometimes this is not that good. So I think it's good to have the entire story in your head in a way, but to not be like, this is a religion. I need to stick exactly like my thinking, right? I mean, you don't want to limit yourself as a creator. That's the worst thing. I mean, I think as an editor, I've had many editorial meetings where I've had to tell the mangaka to slow down and, you're overthinking it because, manga by its very nature is an evolving beast. And, you want to be in the best situation you want to be is where it writes itself, and the only way for it to write itself is that you've created such a unique, developed concept that it can it can take the strain of a long serialization. It can take that burden. So again, don't overthink it. That's like the rookie mistake when creating a manga, overthinking it. Just let it flow. It's all about getting that rhythm and that flow going. And the best way to do it is not to overthink it. Okay. So we have some more questions here. If we can ask you till you think it's okay, it's over, okay?
Oh, so absolutely. No.
It's on you to say to me, Paulo, I'm good. I have to work. So whenever, don't feel bad. We can interrupt anytime. So the first question that they asked here on the chat was, how much does your position influence as an editor a story in terms of changing the first draft made by the author?
Oh, quite heavily.
A lot.
As you know, the name. So basically, the process is that an editor would have just a natural conversation with the mangaka just to discuss what's going to happen in that chapter or what's going to happen in that mini arc. And then from there, the mangaka will create a manga name, which is essentially a storyboard. And that's where the work begins as an editor. That's essentially, the first kind of what we see as far as a chapter of manga is. Usually, that would go through quite a number of drafts until it's ready. I always try to keep it to 3 drafts, maximum 4. I think any more than that, then there is something wrong with the chapter and you kind of need to start all over again. If you're going into double figures, then that chapter's not good, essentially. So, but that all kind of depends on the editor and being able to kind of identify what changes need to be made to ensure an interesting chapter. So yeah, I would say, yes, we are heavily involved in that, but it's a symbiotic relationship. It's all about mangaka and editor informing each other, and we kind of learn together and we grow together as long as that relationship lasts.
It's like family.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, there's a next question. They are insisting about asking about the main character. Okay. So I will make first the question in a way, but I think I have to change the question to a more specific way. The question is there a protagonist without motivation on purpose? So I think what he's asking is something like, is there any way that I can put on a one shot or maybe the first chapters of a serialization, a character that appears to have no purpose?
You can present it that way, but they need a purpose. There needs to be motivation there, or else there's no story. And that applies to life, doesn't it? It's like you want to, think about why you want to be a mangaka. What's your motivation to achieve that? The same applies to characters in manga as well. Without motivation, you've got no story. Without a goal, you've got no story. So, yes, you can present a character who's aimless, but that aimlessness needs to be integral to the story. I think a good example is Alice in Borderland. If you know that manga. Arisu, the character, he starts out aimless. He's got zero motivation. He's playing on his computer console, playing with his mates every day. He's got a high achieving brother. He's got a very demanding father. He starts out aimless. But that is the entire seed of what that manga is, because through his ordeal in Borderland, he becomes motivated and he becomes the person he was always meant to be. So yeah, aimlessness needs to be integral to the story as it unfolds.
Okay. There's a next question. The person asked a really big question, so I'll try to sum it up. Since you talk about some formula or some, not formula, but like the recipe of what make a good manga or a manga that the market wants. How did we as authors or people that are want to try to enter this market can learn about these techniques, since we are not Japanese and we don't have access to all these materials or all this, like this background, like this ecosystem that consumes and lives this.
Yeah.
It's hard to say, I think.
I think, first of all, forget about debuting in Japan. Certainly now. Japanese manga is made for Japanese people. So there are nuances within that manga that none of us would ever get. I've been living in Japan several years and they go over my head. If there was a story, a manga written by a British person for British people, I will resonate with that a lot more effectively than I do with Japanese manga. I love Japanese manga, but I'm only seeing maybe 70% of what that is. There's so much nuance within it that is aimed at a Japanese reader. As far as creating something that will be successful or trending, what are you doing this for? You know, why are you making manga is the question you want to ask. And there's only one answer to it, really, and that is to entertain. You know, you want to entertain people. And, you know, you want to, you know, convey a narrative that entertains in a unique way that's never been done before, character-wise. But it does still follow the conventional kind of rules. So, you know, that's the job of an editor as well. That's why you need editors, because we're there to look at something and does it tick these boxes? You know, is that genre or is that trend worth pursuing? Because it's a balance as well. You don't want to kind of oversaturate with, let's say, you know, steampunk genre. You don't want to oversaturate that. But at the same time, you know, you want to be aware of what readers are collectively enjoying as well. So, you know, it's everything's a fine balance within that. That probably didn't make any sense. It
made a lot of sense. Actually, we talk about this a lot. I can add to it. Why do you do something? To start, it's because you want, you like, right? Why did you start drawing as an example? Because she saw a Pikachu and wanted to draw a Pikachu. And this made she be in love in a lot of things of drawing, with manga, with anime. So first of all, I think you have to make stories or draw or write or do something because you love it, because you want to do it. After, you want to make it profitable, I think. So how to make something that you love profitable but continuing doing what you love and not what others want. It's a balance, as you said. It's a balance. You have to balance yourself, your life, your job. I think it's the adulthood itself. We have to balance what we want to do and what we have to do, right? So I think for the next question, let's see, it's in Portuguese. Let me, como artista, let me just read before. Mas eu entendi. Let me just read in Portuguese first. Como artistas, nós deveríamos ser experimentais no nosso one shot ou focar em executar uma história funcional? It's a question. It's a bit confusing question, but I think we can discuss it. It's like, we artists, when doing a one shot, do we have to? It's better to be experimental, trying things like strange things, different things, or to try to make a functional storyline? It's a confusing question in a way, but I think I understand.
I think I understand it. Yeah, I think I understand it. So you have to follow convention. You know, you cannot reinvent the wheel. So you have to follow, you know, a tried and tested structure. But it's how you tell it is where the uniqueness comes into it. The reason why you have to follow the conventional structure is because that's what the readers expect. You know, if you start to confuse the reader, they're not going to enjoy it. You know, you have a debt to that reader to deliver something entertaining and something they will enjoy. You know, we talked about that previously, as in, you know, a reader's giving up their time to read your work. You know, they're taking time out of their day to read it. So you need to deliver on that sacrifice. It's a debt. You know, you need to deliver on that debt. So please don't try and reinvent the wheel. You know, don't try and play around with story structure, especially within manga, unless you are incredibly experienced, you know, and you've had a lot of publications under your belt. But even then, you know, we follow Kisho Tenketsu, you know, and we are slaves to Kisho Tenketsu in the sense that that is what the reader's expecting.
Okay, the next question, it's a Ok. Agora eu não me lembro mais. Vou para outro. Okay. There's a new question. When talking about self-publishing authors, how do you see the situation for web manga creators for the Japanese audience? Take examples like web mangas that were adopted later. I think he's talking about Pixiv comics or that like the Uzaki-chan or Nagatoro-san that started as web manga and after were adopted like official manga for the editorial.
Yeah. I mean, like we mentioned before about, it's very, very difficult to create manga for a Japanese audience if you're not Japanese. It's, it's almost impossible to be able to do that effectively. There are instances when it has happened where a non-Japanese person has had some level of success in Japan, but 9 times out of 10, that'll be about a foreigner living in Japan. It's their experience of living in Japan.
Usually it's a manga of a foreigner living in Japan and commenting something about the difference.
Exactly.
So this is interesting for the Japanese to see. Oh, that's how they see us.
Exactly.
But outside of it, I never saw something. As you said, I never saw something outside of this.
It's incredibly rare. Yeah, it's incredibly rare. So I wouldn't have that as a goal. Certainly not at the start. I would be aiming for success within your own culture, or success within an audience that would understand your nuance and and the messages you want to say. Again, we talked about protagonists, about being relatable, but the story needs to be relatable. The concept needs to be relatable, and what's relatable in Brazil is not relatable in Japan, and vice versa. So that, first of all, that's where I would be focusing on. And I'm trying to think of the first part of the question about self-publishing.
Oh, the first part is when talking about self-publishing authors, how do you see the situation for web manga creators for the Japanese audience? So I think it's the same thing. Yeah, it's the same answer.
Yeah. I mean, like we've talked about previously, it's about creating a concept, starting with that concept, that seed that you'll be able to grow the story from. And if you've nailed that concept, and as self-publishing, you wouldn't have any editorial support, so it will be rough. There will be elements within it that an editor would say cut out or change. But as long as you keep true to the concept that has birthed this story, then hopefully you should get noticed.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all the questions. Do you have any more questions? Oh, there's another? Well, she sent you just some for me, I think. Oh, there's one more. Okay.
I think we'll say we've got 10 minutes, so let's I'll give a long answer.
It's an easy question, especially if you live in Japan. Is there room for traditional art in the manga industry nowadays? Sure. Yeah.
I don't think I understand that as in traditional art, as in
there's something about some foreign, some no Japanese that people think the digital media dominated everything, and there's no need for traditional artists anymore.
Oh no, there is. There's certainly. I mean, I think every mangaka is different, but in Japan, if you look at like Inio Asano Sensei. He hybrids, so he uses pen and ink, but he also uses digital. So I think that's quite common. It's all about you want to achieve a look to your pages, and sometimes only pen and ink can do that. If you want to do the entire manga in pen and ink, I would encourage that. I think that produces a very unique page when it's just pen and ink. That's the manga I grew up on, that was done like that. There was no digital tools back then. So yeah, I would say whatever you feel comfortable with. Obviously, digital art is a lot quicker, than doing it by pen and ink. But it's it's what you get out of the process. So if you prefer pen and ink, go for it.
Okay, any more questions, Gigi? Okay, I think for the questions, everything's over.
Okay.
I think just one or two things that we can still talk. It's when the stories of Manga International are available, where we can read for the people to okay.
Well, a lot of it we're still in the planning stages of development there, so unfortunately I can't give you an answer to that.
No problem.
But it will be via an application when we're ready. But please follow our social medias, which is Manga International, for news and updates on when we're able to launch and what manga we're going to launch with as well. Also regions, we are targeting specific regions and specific languages as well. But again, please follow our social medias, and we will hopefully start to update that soon.
And also, if someone wants to try to bring you a manga to see if it's possible to try to enter as a one shot or for any kind of contest, if there's a way, if possible, that you send to us or to publish something.
Yeah, there is. I mean, if you look on our website, I'm trying to pull it up now so that I can.
Okay.
There is on our website, which is mangainternational.com. Yeah. We do have a submissions policy at the bottom and an email to send your submissions to. So yeah, please log on to
submissions policy, right?
Submissions policy, and that kind of details what we would accept and the email to send that to.
Okay, I found it. I sent to the chat. So that's
perfect.
Okay, Chris. Oh, Gigi has a question. Okay.
Oh, okay.
She will write for me. I don't know why. You can ask here. Up here on the camera. Okay, where are you rating? Na Twitch? Peraí. Which format should I send? One shot? I think it's one shot, Gigi, right? It's like a one shot or a series proposal.
Yeah, I mean, everything starts with a one shot. Every serialization starts with a one shot. And like I said previously, a one shot is a live test or a road test of a concept. I think when you're thinking about stories and when you're developing stories, if the story does not work in a one shot, it's not going to work in a serialization. It's simple as that. If you're thinking, I can't tell this story in less than 5 chapters, then there's a problem that, the concept isn't quite working. You need to be able to kind of embody and tell and tell that concept within a one shot, within one chapter. So yeah, aim for the one shots.
Okay, so I think that sums everything. That's everything, Gigi. Okay. So, Chris, if you want to say any more things, I think it's the end of the live right now. But if you want to say any more things, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so anybody who is both experienced or just starting out, just remember that what you're doing is your goal is to entertain. You're creating work for other people to read. And that should always be at the forefront of anything you create. Would a person enjoy reading this. So whatever you work on, please, let friends and family read it, get that feedback from them, because that's essentially your first editorial session. Somebody else is reading it and giving you feedback on that. Draw every day, create every day, even if you don't feel like doing it. Say, put an hour aside a day or 2 hours aside a day as a minimum, because you will find out very quickly how much you improve if you do that. And thirdly, read an enormous amount of manga. And there's a lot of manga out there. So, that is the 100% the best way to learn how to make good manga is to read what's come before.
Okay. Thank you again, Chris, for coming. I think
no problem.
Okay, and guys,